Hi everyone. My name's Tommy Murphy and this session is Staging the Real, Transforming Lived Experience into Compelling Drama. We're honoured to be here on Gadigal land and pay our respects to elders past and present and to all Aboriginal people here. I'm Tommy. I'm joined here by Angela Betzian, Alana Valentine and S. Shakti Dharan. And we're all playwrights that have had experience taking real lives and turning it into theatre in various ways. I'll introduce Shakti first, a Western Sydney dramatist of Sri Lankan heritage and Tamil ancestry. Shakti writes work, as he describes it, works of fiction built out of true stories. I'm going to be asking him about that distinction later on. And you'll know his recent work, Counting and Cracking. It's sold out season and rave reviews at the 2019 Sydney Festival, garnering 7 Helpman Awards with Belvoir and Co-Curious. And Shakti, you're also an artist, associate artist at Belvoir, that's right, isn't it? And you founded Curious Works and were the artistic director there as well. And Alana, your work, very famous particularly for your verbatim work. You've just come back from the Adelaide Festival, where you're going to premiere Watershed, the death of Dr. Duncan, a true story. This one is a musical work, isn't it? You've written the libretto with
Oratorio, yeah,
and with Krista Stolkis, you're collaborating with there. And some of you might also know Alana's collaborations with the Bangarra Dance Theatre, most recently Woodjung, Not the Past, which is a work that also derives from Stephen Page's family history, I believe. Is that right?
That's
so
right.
We'll talk about that work. And we're looking forward to Alana's next play, which is Wayside Bride. That's going to be on at Belvoir very soon. And Angela Betzian kick-started her career making ripped-from-the-headlines plays inspired by the living newspaper tradition. And her play Hoods, Children of the Black Skirt and The Dark Room have all been inspired by real characters and real events. And she's currently working on a new comedy about teachers and teaching culture. So I reckon we should talk about some of the ethics of what we do when we're transforming real lives into drama. And I also want to ask that question about why theatre at all? What is it that theatre can do that other forms can't for true stories? But before that, I think our role here, we're not academics. We're going to tell you stories from the perspective of playwrights and some stories about the works we've created. I thought I might start off with an anecdote about one of my first encounters with a real person that I was depicting in a play. And this was for Strangers in Between. I'm grateful that Currency Press published that play. And that was on at Griffin in 2005. So I was 25, very green. And there's a character in that story called Peter, who's pretty acerbic and has isolated himself a bit and a prickly character. His need for love is probably a bit overbearing, and maybe that even tips over to being a bit sleazy. And there's some of the qualities that I was stealing from a dear friend of mine. And as the play approached production, I was terrified about what his response would be. And I even thought maybe I could disguise that the play was on. You know, it's a public event publicised in his suburb. But I sort of went into hiding a little bit. And then we got a phone call to the box office. My friend, I won't name him, said, I want to be there at the first preview because I know this play is based on me. You know, whoops. And but his response surprised me so much because he was very moved by it. He invited all of his friends to come and see it. Some of them made comments like, "You even made him too nice." But the thing that he was, to my surprise, valued most was that the character was flawed, that it was honest, that the character was human, I think. And it told me, it emboldened me. It confronted me with the responsibilities of telling true stories, but it also emboldened me that people value that their life is inspirational, and that there's a generous thing, I think, in telling someone's story well, and I would certainly do it in a different way now. I would consult. So I wanted, maybe we've all had moments like that that have been foundational in meeting or dealing with the real people that we're depicting. Shakti, Counting and Cracking, that's an epic undertaking, dealing with public figures, unknown people, and people close to you. I think even your mother's story is depicted there. So did you have to go into hiding? What was your experience dealing with those real people?
I think one of the really interesting things I had to do with Counting and Cracking was dealing with the ghost of my great-grandfather. Growing up, my mother didn't talk about Sri Lanka at all, and part of the reason for writing that play was my efforts to uncover why and how we came to Australia. And she thought that was an idiotic undertaking and told me not to do it. So I had to do it in secret from her. And I went to Sri Lanka against her wishes, and I've still got family there. And one of my uncles, like everyone's an uncle in our community, or an auntie, and I still remember sitting in his house, and he pulled a box, like a shoe box, down from the shelf. And he was like, "This is a box of your great-grandfather's letters." And he wrote a bunch of letters to his grandchildren. And I discovered, and we read the letters to each other, which is quite an intimate exercise for two Sri Lankan men to do. I discovered that my great-grandfather was born a farmer, was the only Tamil politician in the first post-independence government of Sri Lanka, and kind of changed from being a champion for equality into an advocate for self-determination for Tamil people, giving up on his kind of optimism of his earlier life. And I knew that his story kind of just came to me was the same as the story of our community, and if I could tell his story properly, I could tell our community story. And in order though to know that I'd done that right, I had to get the approval of his descendants, and primarily my mother, who refused to talk about the project. And so then I wrote the first draft of the play, and bits of his letters, versions of them are in the play, and then she read it, and then on her own, and I sent an email and got no reply. But I assume she read it because then she started opening up about Sri Lanka, and then the stuff she started to say ended up being in the play as well, and that was the only way that I understood that she was happy with how I was telling my great-grandfather's life. And
would you have done that differently if you could do it again, or has it informed your process since that experience?
I think it has. That part of it was a very affirming experience, because we're skipping ahead to the other topic you're going to talk about, but I don't think there was any other method that could have got my family to talk about what happened to them. Yeah,
that's interesting. I feel like we'll be talking today about times we've got it right, but maybe also times we've got it wrong as well, if we're brave enough to admit that. Yeah. What about you, Alana? Is there an early experience that sort of is foundational for your approach?
I do remember speaking with some of the Parramatta girls. I wrote a play about women incarcerated in group homes, and I wanted to put on the stage the fact that they had confessed to me that they had passed on the trauma by bashing their children. And I wanted to have that on stage. I was very nervous because in my plays I very rarely kind of obfuscate about who it is. In that play, there were characters collapsed into certain names. And one of the things that was interesting for me when I talked to students about it, they're like, but, the characters didn't say all the words. And that's an example I use about protecting those women, because people say, well, if it's verbatim, why don't you just have one character owning that story, like I'm talking about, of bashing their kids? So for me, doing the research, there were probably 7 or 8 women who told me that. And then my power as the dramatist was to choose one and to make them sort of live with it, as it were. So in fact, collapsing the stories into a character protected the woman. So it's kind of this thing about that people always think it's more ethical or more interesting to just have the real person speaking, but there are strategies you need to take when you're dealing with real people to get on stage some of those ugly truths. I mean, I think our job is to speak truth to all sorts of things, power, culture, problems, you know. So for me, the answer to your question is I haven't hidden that, but it's about how do I keep the integrity of what was said to me, but protect the individuals. Yeah.
And so sometimes what's invented or made up around that material, would you say that's more truthful somehow?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a much longer discussion, but I talk about
more
the fact
truthful
that,
than the factual.
Yeah, there is more truth in what we do than there is sometimes in real life. And students, again, find that really controversial. You know,
Yes.
Oh my God, how can you say that? It's not authentic. And it's like, no, it's artifice. That's what we're doing. But we've given our lives to the belief that if you crush a life story down into 2 hours, you'll learn something about it that you don't when you're going through it day to day.
Yeah. Angela.
I have a story from the year 2001 that I'm a little ashamed to tell, but I will tell it anyway. I was fresh out of university in my early 20s. I formed a company with a fellow university student, Letitia Caceres. We called our company Real TV, which was very much a kind of spin on living newspaper, which some of you, I'm sure, know was a tradition or a practice that emerged out of the Federal Theatre Project, which is an incredible initiative under the New Deal. It was funded by the US government during the Great Depression to support unemployed writers, directors and actors. An incredible vision. And I often kind of, over the last 2 years, I've reflected on that particular kind of project because I thought, how would things have changed here if our government had had vision to actually keep the wolf from the door of so many starving theatre makers. But that aside, one of our first productions was a play called The Suitcase, which we presented as part of a youth theatre festival. And the producers of this theatre festival were kind of surprised that we were in our early 20s. And I was pitching an idea that was based on a real event that had happened in Brisbane. It was a story of a man, a resident of a boarding house in the Fortitude Valley. And he murdered his friend over a couple of dollars and dismembered that man and placed him in a suitcase, and those remains were found in his room in the boarding house. And when we pitched this idea to the youth festival, they really questioned why we weren't writing about our own lived experiences as young people. Our argument was that actually we were young people, and these were the things that were interesting to us. We wanted to talk about oppression. Our influences were people like Pinter and the incredible work that was going on at Melbourne Workers' Theatre, and crazy crushes on Cornelius and Reeves and Chalkis and Bovell. So we wanted to kind of make theatre like that. They accepted our pitch, and we rehearsed the show. And I wrote a play which was really a departure from that actual story. It was a piece of kind of magic realism that was about poverty and alienation and homelessness. On the night that it was due to open, it happened to be September 11, 2001. So we arrived at the theatre thinking the world was about to end, to find lawyers were on the stage. Because a relative of the victim had heard on the radio about our play and had made a complaint. And then lawyers were, of course, consulted, and the play was considered to be potentially in contempt of court, which was fair enough, as it hadn't gone to trial. And so the play was shut down, and we were, of course, incredibly crushed. And we went out and got outrageously drunk that night in the valley. But, in hindsight, reflecting on that particular experience, I feel that we were incredibly naive and quite insensitive at least in promoting the work as being based on a real story. And I think there was something slightly salacious about that approach. In our defence, we didn't choose to publicise on the radio that it had been based on that true story. And we went on to create other kind of ripped from the headlines theatre that wasn't so controversial, I hope. But yeah, that's my story.
It's really interesting, Angela, because I think in various ways we've all touched on how the work is framed, you know, what promise we make to the audience about the show that we're giving them. And it does matter. You know, I'm thinking recent work that I did was Packer and Sons, and I guess there would have been a choice to invent characters around them, but it felt like there was just more to be said with the real people, that they were, strangely, it was going to be more universal, more mythic, and more of an opportunity for metaphor. So I made a claim that these are these real people. Yeah. How have you guys approached that in different ways? And what are and does it change project to project for you? It has certainly for me. Have you entered into a different contract with your audience, and why? Who'd like to answer that? You would, I know. You've written books about this.
I have written a book. It's in the foyer. Well, it's interesting, Tommy, because recently, like you referred to, I've just written an oratorio about the death of Dr. Duncan in Adelaide, and the South Australians among you I know will know that story, and many gay and lesbian people as well, because it was about an academic, George Ian Ogilvy Duncan, who was thrown in the River Torrens and drowned, and it basically set off gay law reform throughout Australia, South Australia being the first place in 1975 to legalise it. So what Christos and I did when we went down to Adelaide, the first thing we did was go to a Duncan memorial event that they have every year. And then we also went to, I have a friend who works, it's called the Rainbow Hub. It's part of, South Australia has a whole department that deals with ageing South Australians, which is fantastic. And a lesbian friend of mine has set up this Rainbow Hub for ageing gay and lesbian people. So we went and spoke to them, and they were all the people who remembered 1975 when no one was out, when it was still criminal. Some of them had been on the beat, you know, days before Duncan or whatever. So my answer to your question is that, like, I'm approaching that really differently now, because in oratorio, you're not using real words. We're writing lyrics, basically.
Is it billed as a true story?
Well, of course it's a true story. It happened metres from the theatre, and I think that the impact of having it in that space was extraordinary for me, and I think for the Adelaide Festival it was an amazing moment to actually hear that story put on stage when metres away he'd been killed, you know. So I guess what I'm saying is that there is an authentic community wherever you look for it, even if the real person is no longer alive. There are people of that time and place, that you can find.
And Chuck, do you have a particular approach to this? Because you say that your works are fiction, but what is it? They're based on true events.
Yeah,
is that right?
I think because, I guess there's two reasons for that. One is practical. A lot of the stuff I do, almost all of it is like, you know, it might involve politicians being accused of war crimes, or asylum seekers who are still have applications under review or whatever, and so I just don't feel like it's an option for me for it to ever be what it is in reality, because people could get hurt or sent back home or something. But then I think secondary to that, I think it depends on why you write that particular project. Like, the greatest story of Counting and Cracking is kind of like to do with that there was a decision to embark on nationalism in the 1950s in Sri Lanka, which sowed the seeds for civil war many decades later. And that's how my people had to break up across the world and found it hard to know who they are or why they are. And their family embraces at the end of that show. And the point of that show is to go, all of that is a universe inside that family's embrace. So if there was we have such a contested history, so if there was any actual true person from reality in that show, then the discussion would have been about that, rather than that greater story I was trying to tell. So for us, because it's so contested and everything is, people are easily upset. It distracts from the purpose of the project.
Right.
But the beauty is everyone knows what's going on. Audiences are very mature. So everyone who came to that show knew exactly who everyone was without it being named. Yes. And so the real stories and the real people are all there, but Yeah.
It feels when you take on this task of writing true stories, your role develops beyond being a playwright to being a bit of a diplomat as well. I've found that you have to do a lot of work ethically, and also just ensuring that people have been consulted, but also just that people are aware of what the intent of the work is, I think, as well. That's something that I've learnt doing it. I wonder if, I want to hear from you what your kind of personal protocols are when you make work, and do they shift project to project? Angela, what are the ways that you ensure that your work is ethical?
I think by avoiding, I feel like I personally don't have the courage or the discipline to be that diplomat, and therefore I would always seek to kind of to veil or to be lateral about the real event or the real characters. It's such an awesome responsibility, and I don't think that I have the kind of tools available to kind of do that. I feel like what I do is, when necessary, engage the right consultants in terms of developing the work, in whatever kind of field that is, and just truly commit to the process of research and to truly immerse in the world that I'm dealing with. I wrote a play called Children of the Black Skirt, which was specifically for young audiences, and there was an extensive research process that we did, and part of that was immersing ourselves in the Ford inquiry, which was it was an inquiry into the abuse of children in Queensland institutions, and it was conducted by Lenine Ford in 1999. And it was something like 300 testimonies of people who had grown up in institutions, but it traced from 1911, I think, to 1999, so it was a huge span of history. And we sat down, we met with Lenine Ford in her home. This was a couple of years after she'd completed the inquiry, and we spent hours talking with her about her personal connection to that story, to these stories, actually. I guess it was that moment talking to her was we had a deep sense about the responsibility we were taking on, which I still have to this day in terms of that play. Yeah.
And is that process, is that how you would always approach this? Is it the same protocol every time, or does it shift?
Well, I think it shifts. I think it shifts, yeah.
It kind of has to, because of the nature of the work, or who you have access to, or who it is that you're portraying.
That's
I mean,
right.
is that person, even if are they dead or alive? I mean, or are they within reach? And there's always that difficult moment where you've got to time when do you approach them, and how do you do it that they might try and stop you doing this work? It's a tough one. Can we always follow the rules of a journalist? Like, can you always give someone the right of the reply, and should you, do you think?
I've never, Alana, I'm sure you're more experienced with this, but I've never sort of entered, when I've sat down to interview people, I'm writing a play about teachers, and I've sat down with a huge number of teachers for many, many hours, both here and in the UK, and I didn't have a contract before we started talking, a verbal contract. I didn't kind of articulate how I would be using their stories. So there's incredible generosity, though, of people, and you hope, I guess, as a writer, that you don't disappoint, you don't offend that culture.
Or abuse that power, because people can be very forthcoming.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Tommy, I would actually, I'm not going to contest that you have to be a diplomat, but my ethical protocol is that I have an obligation to write a great work of art for the audience.
A cracking night in the theatre, that's our job.
And secondly, I want to do what I said before, which is show these people the unpleasant truth that I find is already being carried in the community. Like, there's always in a community something that everybody knows but nobody's talking about, and they'll tell it to a stranger. And then my job is to put that on stage, and they might be a little bit uncomfortable with that. But my job is not hagiography or proselytising for the community. It's not my job to say, aren't the Rabbitohs fans great? It was my job to say the Rabbitohs fans were great, and then when it got to the crunch, they didn't know how to say thank you to Kerry Stokes, they didn't know how to appreciate what was going on and suck it up. And the audience went quiet.
Right.
And then, of course, I bring in all the, the fans, and it all ends and we're all wonderful. But they take home that truth. And I say this because I profoundly believe that it is a human right to see your life on a stage and to see the flaws in that life. And for it not just to be, middle-class marriages where we see, what the concessions are and what the dreadful things are, but to actually see the lives of people who don't get talked about, and to not just celebrate that, but to actually go, you know what, this is all amazing. What about this truth about your community? And they love that. They actually want you to do that. They don't want you to just say, and Shakti, that's what you did with Counting and Cracking. You said, what is the crack in this that created this problem, isn't it? Yeah, so...
I think it's really interesting because we have these multiple hats we might wear as a writer. So there's the what we like to think is most of our work, which is the writing. But then there's this other stuff which is where the diplomat comes in, I think, is to do with the process by which you relate to the real people who are part of your act of writing.
Which is about respect, isn't it?
I was just going to say. And so I think there's the work on the stage might be the same either way, but how respectful or not respectful you are in terms of your process makes all the difference in terms of what you're doing. And then the third thing I think is, and this is something we could all write theses about, I'm not expecting that we discuss it within the short time we have here, is to do with the relationship between the purpose of what you write and how an audience carries it. Because it's one thing to put on the piece of theatre that you want to put on. It's another thing to take into account how the community might react to that in terms of what effect you might hope it has in that community. So for me, it's very important to separate how I feel about speaking up about something, because there's been so many injustices in the stuff that I do, in not the process but the subject matter, versus what the best story is for the community to be able to carry that in a way that they are open and vulnerable to it and then act on it. Because they are separate things. And so that openness to how an audience will take a story into their hearts fundamentally changes the act of writing. And then the thing that's good about being respectful with people who affect the process is you get a taste of what might happen in terms of how an audience reacts. And so you kind of get you start to understand what's going to happen come up first opening night way earlier.
Yeah.
I guess that's one of the...
You sure do.
Well, that's what's exciting, isn't it?
Change, but you can at least prepare yourself.
Because it's part of our process, we have to acquaint ourselves with the community and consult along the way. There is that opportunity of inviting a different audience to these plays often as well, isn't it? And you've both spoken about, all of you have spoken about place and community. So we just maybe just extend that idea a little bit, the way that a true story happens beyond the walls of the theatre. Has everyone found, I've certainly found that to be true, that there's sort of a connection to, I think Alana, it'd be true to say of your work with Lindy Chamberlain, for example, because I know that you went to Darwin itself, and that must have been an extraordinary experience to be taking that story there.
Yeah, can I just take a moment to tell the audience about that? It's a 1,000-seat theatre in Darwin, and, that's where Lindy Chamberlain Creighton, for those of you who don't know, I'd be very surprised, but was the woman whose baby was taken by a dingo in 1980. So I did a play which was all the letters, the public wrote 20,000 letters to Lindy Chamberlain Creighton, and they're in the National Library, and I went and looked at them. And I picked out, in that case, about 30. And then I went and did an interview with Lindy, which forms the sort of spine of it, a monologue. And she told me it was the first time that it had been told in her words,
Yeah.
And so at the end of the play, there's this moment where Lindy takes these baby clothes and puts them into an archive box, and she sings a lullaby to Azaria. And every night the audience would just be in floods of tears wherever we were, because it was about going, you did this, we did this to her, she's telling us now we can put it down. And we're not doing it in our own little private homes, we're doing it in a room full of 500 people. So, this is to answer your why theatre, because I was in a room with 1,000 people in Darwin where the actress put the baby clothes in the box and closed it up, and then Lindy Chamberlain-Creighton walked on stage, right. And you can imagine the audience went berserk, because it was like, we have been carrying the shame of what we did to her, and we all did it to her, the media, this country, and it was a collective moment to put it down. And she just stood there, and I stood back, and she walked forward on the stage, and it was just transformative, that moment.
And particular to place at that time?
In Darwin, of course, but everywhere. I think that this culture carries griefs. And First Nations people talk about it in the most incredible way, that they facilitate us to put that stuff down. There'll be another panel, so I won't tread on any of that, but it's just, there are griefs that audiences carry that they want to put down as a collective, and that's why theatre.
Well, why don't we talk about what? Why don't we talk about why theatre then? Angela, why aren't you a journalist? Why aren't you taking true stories and writing them in another form, literature, film? Why theatre for you?
I think, I just wanted to pick up on kind of that idea, because, as I've said, I often kind of get real events from the media, I guess. And I think, we all sort of doom scroll. We all engage with media, with the news in a particular kind of distanced way. And I think what theatre can do in those kinds of experiences, that it's not just an intellectual engagement with an event or an idea. It is a deep emotional engagement, and it is the only way as human beings that we can actually empathise with the people that are experiencing these horrors, these catastrophes, these events. And I don't think that we get that from a film, and I don't think that we get that from TV. I think we only get that from that theatrical, that communal theatrical experience. You just cannot achieve that moment in any other medium.
Because we're all together in a room.
Yeah, and we do have collective grieving. What's the plural?
No idea.
Griefs.
Yes,
griefs. I think. But I'm done. Defer to you.
Yeah.
What about you, Shakti? Why theatre?
For me, something that's been fascinating for me with coming from a minority culture is that so much of what we put on stage, there's a decision you have to make about that some people aren't even aware of, but you could choose to go down a path where you put on a performative version of your community, which is essentially what you have subconsciously decided is palatable for broader Australia. And of course, none of us want to do that. And so the act of really doing what you're doing is I think, the public act of belonging. And it was hilarious talking to Sri Lankans after Canny Cracking, because they would we'd have a conversation about the Sri Lankan stuff. And then they would be like, I don't understand why anyone else likes this show. I don't understand, it is so specific to us. And so half the show is them watching other people watch it, which obviously you can't do at Netflix on the couch, right? And
but you could particularly do it well at that venue. I saw it in the town hall where you were aware of the audience around you.
Well, we did that on purpose.
Yes.
So that this would happen. And it's the same the other way around. Everyone who's not Sri Lankan who came to that show usually tells me what they thought of the show, but also watching a Sri Lankan family watch it. And so I think it's different. There's a difference between what you're vulnerable with at home and in your friends, and versus what you're vulnerable with in public. And theatre's the only thing that allows us to present our most dearly held truths in public, which is why it's excruciating and yet why it's so powerful.
Is it also because it's sort of silly? Like we're all just sitting there playing this game. We're all imagining. I don't know. There's something disarming about that. It's just so stupid. Like we're there pretending these people are. I love that about it.
I love that about it too.
I think that it's the imagination is something that means we can illuminate true things in a kind of elevated way. I think more powerful. Now, but I want just to go back to our moment of ethics. I would love you to think about those times you've got it wrong. Have there been moments where you think, I really didn't do it right? I mean, maybe I should offer one. There's probably, without, actually, there's some things I can't say. But, maybe like even say with doing a public figure like James Packer, I wasn't able to speak to him directly. And when I was about to, he went courageously about his mental health problems and went to hospital, and it was clear that it wouldn't be helpful to approach him at that time. To be honest, I was also, hesitant because I was frightened that not just him but other people might try to get in the way of the production, so I delayed that. And when I went to, I didn't then have the opportunity to speak to him. And that did, I think, betray my personal protocol of how I would normally do it. Because what I valued about telling true story is also sometimes actually not just is sometimes becoming friends with people that I've met through the course of this type of work. And I don't think that would have happened in that case, but but that ethically, that right of reply, I think, should have been given. That rather than just writing a play about via interviews and reportage, but it was the best I could do. But that one for me, I kind of go, I wish I could have done a bit better, and I will really work hard in the future to make sure that I don't do that again. So I've given one of mine. Does anyone else want to bravely admit times when you might not have got it right?
Well, I've already shared mine.
Oh, you did?
And I guess because it happened so early on in my career, that it's kind of shaped the direction of things. And I was a lot more kind of careful about kind of making those, just kind of keeping a distance from the original material.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, when you asked us the other day to think of that, I've just worked with so many scary communities. Like you do not cross South supporters, you do not cross Parramatta girls. Like I just have not made those mistakes. Like because my life depends on it. Yeah, that's right. So I really have tried to think.
But has your practice evolved? Like have you changed?
What I thought of to talk about was the difference between interviewing people who are not used to being interviewed.
Yes.
Who are like kind of, in fact, they just love the experience of being interviewed, and you kind of look into their soul and you realise that this is such a rare thing for another human being to ask someone. I mean, it's just like, you ask them where they live and they tell you, and it's, like you say, it's the most enormous honour and privilege.
Yes.
Do you know the parallel? I was researching a play about gambling. And I was invited, I asked permission to attend a GA meeting, where was I? In Brisbane. And that context, and I'm sure it's relevant to kind of AA and NA, that's the only other forum where people are able to stand up and tell their story. And it's such a unique and powerful interaction and exchange. It's incredible, and I can see why it's a therapeutic tool, in those contexts. But it's also a therapeutic tool in terms of talking to the dramatist.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to... The thing I have learned, the tip I would give to writers is the difference between talking to someone who does interviews all the time and is you've got to have very different strategies. So I for the play that's going to be on at Belvoir, Wayside Bride, which is about people who are married at the Wayside Chapel, and it tells the story of Ted Knopfs, who set up the Wayside Chapel. Some of you will know it's a sort of... He was charged with heresy. It's a heretical place. So many people got married when the church wouldn't marry. Is there anyone in the audience who was married at the Wayside Chapel? There almost always is. No? Okay, well, come and see the play then. But what I was going to say is I interviewed Bill Cruz. Now, Bill Cruz runs the Exodus Foundation. He's like on the media all the time. He's used to being interviewed. And so I had to sort of think about what are the strategies, because what what interviewees will do is they parade out their thing that they've told you that they feel safe with. And I listened to Bill, and he talked to me about all the work he does to help other people. And then at one point I said to him, and what about the church? What's it like being in the church, and how do they treat you? And there was this silence, and I thought, oh God, I've really done something wrong. And then he started crying. And I was just like, oh God, I've made Bill Cruz cry. And I was really, really worried, because he was really sobbing, and he just sort of talked about the incredible loneliness of being a maverick in an institution like the church. He just had all this pain that he'd never let out. And so for me, it was also, that gave me an insight into why we're not journalists. Because playwrights ask different questions.
Yes.
We're not asking for answers or the headline. We're kind of going, where do you live? Like, what have you never said to anybody recently?
Trying to understand,
you know, isn't
a
that
struggle.
right?
Yeah.
We're mining for conflict and a struggle. Yeah.
But is there a sort of flipping that slightly? You know, we are mining for conflict. We're looking for conflict. Is there something kind of a bit ambulance chasing about it? Do you know, like that?
Well, that's where you've got to keep on checking, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. You know that it's a fine line.
It is a fine line.
You need the drama. You need the conflict.
I've always thought people are adults. You know what I mean? Like, people are adults, and actually I think that they love to do that. They love you looking in and going, what's in there? And then by about the 40-minute mark in the interview, they're saying things that even they didn't know they thought.
Yeah.
And
But
they
do you
love
ever
that,
feel
you know. But Shakti, what is your experience of that?
I don't know. They tend to come from work with people in places that there's enough conflict in Sri Lanka to last 1,000 plays. So I don't ever look. I don't look for conflict.
Wait, it's just there.
Yeah, well, I think the things. So I guess the real question is what then emerges as what can be a story, and it's like, what is it? I think it's to do with the capacity to have oppositional truths within actions that someone does in their life.
Brilliant, yeah.
And because that opens my community up
Yeah.
to reconcile. And it's because, you know, it's that thing that we're stuck at the moment in the modern world, which is like, it really doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. What matters is your capacity to sit and hold space with someone who disagrees with you. And yeah, so I'm just always looking for ways to engender that feeling.
Amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but harder than it sounds.
Have any of you become mates with people that you've met through this process? I certainly have. And it's, I mean, part of it, I sometimes have been, we've all said, you know, to get confronted with that responsibility. But I think of Mary Ellen Field, who's a character in Mark Colvin's Kidney. She's a victim of phone hacking. But when I approached her to ask her if she wanted to let me help tell her story, she immediately just emailed me her everything, text messages, diaries, emails with Mark, everything. I became the hacker instantly. And I was like, she'd been a victim of this before, but here, this time she's in charge of it, handing it over. And that play was however many years ago, and we're still mates that are WhatsApping, you know, once a week at least. Are you mates with Lindy?
Yeah, Lindy.
You are?
Lindy and yes, Lindy is one of the greatest privileges of my life to know this woman. But she's a sewer, so we would often like talk about Azaria and all of that, and you know, I get the information, and then she'd say to me, "Now, do you know how to do a bishop's sleeve, Alana? Because I'm a sewer." So we'd sit and talk about this, and the people from the National Library would come past, and they'd be like, "What?" You know, like they're talking about this stuff. So I actually think that it's something interesting you're talking about, Tommy, because it's not just about going in there, getting the story and getting out.
Well, you're inspired by their courage. That's why you think they're good dramatic characters, perhaps.
Yeah, but also you kind of come at them in different ways, don't you? You know, Lindy is one of the funniest people I've ever met. So she rings me and she'll talk to me for an hour, and she's just cracking really bad jokes, you know, and it's like she's just fantastic. So I wouldn't say friend, I wouldn't presume. But, yeah, I am still in touch with her and many of the people. I mean, you do move on to the next. People understand that contract, that you're there to honour their story. You don't have to be their friends for life, but you're always sort of you're always contactable. Like I say, you're not just going in, grabbing the story and leaving. I think that's important. Yeah.
Some of them are Velcro, and I don't mind.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should open it up to questions. Is it the time for that? If anyone has any, we'll keep on rabbling on if no one does. But have a think if you've got any questions. No, that's fine. We've got more we can talk about. Oh, there is one?
Question.
Yeah. I've been told to remind everyone as well that we're after questions, not statements as well, but I'm sure that's understood.
Mine is definitely a question.
Excellent.
Thank you. That was all very fascinating. You talked a lot, all of you, about how you take care of the players in the stories that you deal with. And Alana, you just touched on it, but I'm interested in how you'll take care of yourselves during the process and how long you carry the players with you after the show is over.
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think I've ever asked it of myself. Have anyone else thought about that? Your own self-care in this process?
Yeah, I've written about that in my book.
Good.
Sorry, Tommy.
Did you plant one in the audience?
You're a plug.
Look, what I've said is that I take direction from the community on how to deal with that, and I can honestly say that the Parramatta Girls and Hey Girls Home Story dug a little hole in my soul that will never be filled again. It's called Transmitted Trauma, and when I did a play about child sexual abuse, there was a lot of discussion about how to look after yourself. And like I say, what I've written about is that I look to the community. So the way the Parramatta Girls were like very funny, I don't think it's any surprise that I said Lindy's very funny. She used to talk to me about laughing about the abusive letters, that they were the comic relief, and these would be pornographic images cut out with her head put on them and someone ejaculating onto the page that had dried up, and she'd go, oh, look at this is hilarious. And I'm like, okay, that's the way to deal with it. And so each community often has they have a way to deal with it. So I would urge writers who are working with people or communities, look to the way they deal with their trauma and follow that.
And what about you, Shakti? You must have approach to this also in your positions at Co-Curious, I imagine, as well. I mean, you'll be dealing with stories of trauma quite regularly in your work. How do you protect yourself, and how do you recommend other artists protect themselves?
I really wish I had a good answer to that question. I think, it was interesting because I'm really used to, I've come to writing very late, and I'm used to supporting other people to help tell their stories. Worked a lot in community, and so I think I've got good skills in that department, which is really about making sure that a writer understands their purpose for writing what they're writing, and reminding them of that as they progress through the process, and upholding that as a kind of primary driver in how they develop the work. Because normally that falls away, and so much of the negative effects that come from putting on a piece has to do with the problems that you knew were coming at you and you kind of brushed aside. And then by the time it hits the stage, they're coming at you with frenetic force. And mostly we all learn that through doing it badly once, and then we kind of go, let's not make that happen again. But then going through it myself is really different, because it's like, I found Counting and Cracking that season excruciating because I've never been that vulnerable for that long. It was like, that play is like my soul on a plate. And it's like, week after week of that, it's like, you're used to just having a more balanced life, where you like get an anonymous coffee in a cafe for half the day, and you only, so I think ongoing vulnerability I found really tough with self-care. And the practical solution I've had to that is try and find a way to work on less things more deeply, because the ability to understand every facet of what you're doing seems to help a lot with self-care. And it's so boring as an answer, but it really helps. And I think
that's great advice.
How you jump from one project to another is usually how you harm yourself.
Yeah, I think the writing itself is there's a catharsis in it, and there's a therapy in it. I know that I've written about even plays that have been about my own kind of lived experience that I've never acknowledged to any of my collaborators, any of the audience members, never articulated that. But I have been exorcising those experiences in the writing in itself. So that's a kind of a powerful kind of process of self-care, I think.
And the other thing is just to not work too much. Like I've got 2 little kids, and it's just kind of like making sure that your work's, like there are more things that are more important or central. It's a really important psychological contextualization.
That was a great question. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Down the front here.
I was just wondering if there was a scene or an episode in any of your plays that you might have had in an earlier draft that you then decided, and you don't have to reveal what that was, but the decision behind perhaps not including it to protect that person, or it didn't creatively work for the overall arc of the story, and you'd thought that it was going to be creatively invigorating to the play, and then when you've done the whole piece, you've gone back, or that it went too far, it was too personal, and even though the person might have even told you about it in an interview or a letter, that it didn't serve the overall purpose, or it was, you can't write that, you made that decision.
That's a great question, yeah. Well, I'll throw it to the panellists, but and maybe also times that you've felt censored maybe as well. Rather that is your own judgment, or have you been told to pull something back?
Going back to that play, Children of the Black Skirt, that I wrote, the inquiry was about government and non-governmental institutions, but the overwhelming kind of horror that occurred was, as a result of the Catholic Church and other churches, but, they were kind of responsible for atrocities against children. And we wanted to find a way of kind of articulating that for young audiences in a show that could tour into schools without kind of causing a kind of shitstorm. And so the original version of the play was much more literal, and that was kind of seen by producers and touring bodies as being far too controversial or far too much of an indictment, I guess. And so I was forced to come up with a language that was more heightened, but not a retreat. And so, I created this character called the Black Skirt that was wearing this, flowing Victorian dress, a skirt of rosary beads connected to a pair of iron scissors, and it was very clearly the image of a Catholic nun, but it was distanced, it was kind of alienated. And so ultimately, I think that choice was a much more powerful choice. Nobody, everybody read the image as that, as a figure of the Catholic Church, but it was not the Catholic Church. And so maybe that answers the question in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just sorting through and thinking how many I could tell in a short period of time. I mean, the definition of a playwright is the ability to suffer. Really, that's what sorts us out. We lose stuff all the time. And the panel that Vanessa Bates was on was talking about collaboration and co-writing. So I've had a lot of recent experiences of co-writing. So I was going to say in Barbara and the Camp Dogs with Ursula and I, we had to cut out some of the filthy jokes. But those of you who've seen it will know that we didn't leave many out. And basically that was extraordinary experience because we could egg each other on. And it was the same with Christos Chalkis, who some of you will know is a great provocateur, and so with Watershed, we were just pushing each other to our limits. So I don't think it exactly answers your question, but I wanted to actually just talk about that. I am more and more writing with other people, and I absolutely love the experience because it's just freeing, and the contract we make is that we never tell anyone who's written what, and it's an incredible experience actually. So cutting things, yes, but also keeping things is a great joy of collaborating. keeping things you would self-censor, which is what you were alluding to a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But mostly it's just cutting scenes because they're not good enough, actually. I mean, that's just the process, isn't it? I just sort of, write a really fat draft and then find the good play within it, hopefully, But there are, of course, sometimes delicate legal matters when we're dealing with real people, and sometimes we've probably had experiences where we've been told to rein it in a bit. That can hurt.
I think it really helps to know post first draft what your story is, because it helps you clarify that. When you're talking to lots of real people, around first draft you tend to get obsessed with trying to include all of it because you just love them all, and so you have to find a way to separate yourself from that and go, this is not all of the stories in the world in one play.
Yeah.
And so what the hell is this? And then you have a kind of more distance mechanism to know what to leave out despite your
Do you also find, it might be also in process, I find actually I was thinking about this when you were talking about interviews as well, it's not only listening to what the person is saying, but trying to learn their voice, you're trying to learn this fluency of the characters of the story, and there's an exciting moment that might take a draft or two where you kind of go, I'm versed in them enough, I can do the rewrites or invent a scene because I can inhabit them, mimic them, or whatever it is. I always find that exciting with the real people stories as well. Yeah. Okay, any more questions? There are two up the back there. I don't know where our microphone is.
How do you balance truth and imagination?
Just a quick one to end with.
Yeah, because sometimes, as we said before, sometimes the imagined is arguably more truthful. Well, and we did say this before as well, which I think we need to stress, is that our duty is to the audience. So as dramatists, we do have to make sure it's a great night in the theatre. And so that has to be the guide, doesn't it? Imagination wins sometimes just because we have to sort of deliver the goods, I reckon.
Yeah, I would
Most
just
of the
also
time.
say whose truth and what imagination. Are you talking about the audience's imagination, our imagination, and which truth? I mean, Shakti already beautifully kind of articulated that idea of holding two truths. I think in a 10-person play, you hold 10 truths, don't you? I mean, I think that truth is the thing that we're trying to get to, and it's complex and contested a lot as well. Yeah, so I think truth is the most important thing to speak to the audience, to power, to everything. But imagination is just inherent in we're putting it on a stage. It's imaginative because of that.
I think a healthy order is diving into lots of things that happen in the real world, then that leading you as a playwright to make decisions around what the underlying reality of that is. And then all of the imaginative acts must heighten that underlying reality, not take away from it.
So I need to remind you what the next session is. We're going to have a 15-minute break in a moment, and then you should come back and see Wesley Enoch chair the Black Theatre Today session after this one. Thank you so much for having us here. It's been a real honour to be a part of this festival, and thank you to Currency for organising this. It's great to be having this opportunity for discourse about what we do and the reasons why we do it. So thank you so much, Currency, for everything you do for Playwrights.